concept that's, I think, really pretty cool. If you watch the TED Talk on bacterial communication, it's pretty incredible. And the things we can do to prevent cells from, quote, talking to each other, prevent bacterial growth is incredible. What I want to do today is just kind of give you a brief overview. Chapter 11 is really detailed. We're not going to go into very much detail at all. Okay, we're not going to go into very much detail at all. I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Okay, and then I want to give you a little bit of background, and then just give you the basics in chapter 11. Okay, on cell communication. First thing in cell communication is, what does that mean? Well, it's how cells, quote, talk to each other. If your brain cells talk to each other, okay, how does my brain cell talk to each other? Well, I have to hear a sound. You're hearing a sound right now. That message has to be sent through your brain. And they communicate chemically. Some cells produce what are called local regulators. They send out a signal and other cells pick it up. Some cells, called endocrine cells, release hormones into the bloodstream. Okay? Hormones are an example of long-distance signaling. We'll talk later on about plants. Plants produce hormones too. They do long-distance signaling from the tips of their shoots all the way down to their roots. Okay? So we have local signaling, which means one cell communicates with the cells right around it. We'll come back to this when we talk about mitosis a little bit. You have long-distance signaling with hormones, especially. Okay, so you see a lion running at you, and you get scared. You get some adrenaline pumping. Well, that's because your eyes saw it. There's communication in your nerve cells. There's communication to the cells of your brain. Your brain cells send a signal to your adrenal glands, which are all the way down in your kidneys, to produce adrenaline. And adrenaline went into your bloodstream and signaled all the cells of your body that are needed to fire. Okay? That's what we mean by cell communication. Cell communication. Now, let me find I want to make this, I don't think I like any of these right here, so let me pause it a minute. Okay. There are 3 steps that you need to know about cells communicating with each other. There's reception, transduction, and response. I'm going to give you a lot of details about this, but it's not that important except to understand how it works. Okay, in other words, the devil is not in the details in this case. Okay, you will get a pretty good concept of how this works without me having to go through great gory detail. That's the important thing here. So, we're going to talk about reception, transduction, and response. And we're going to do that with some images. Okay, and I'm going to, there's a cell signaling overview here that I'm just going to use. You can look at the pictures in your book for more detail. Okay, but here's the idea. That some kind of signal, almost always chemical, is sent. On the surface of every cell is a receptor protein. A protein that is sort of enzyme-like, that has a site that recognizes that specific receptor. And you're thinking about this, and you're thinking, okay, so my cells have all these receptor proteins on them. Yes. For example, a quick example is the hormone insulin. We're going to use this example all along. Insulin is produced when your body's blood sugar gets too high. In other words, your pancreas produces insulin after you eat as the blood sugar level in your body rises. Cells in your body insulin is produced and it goes into receptor proteins on the surface of the cells. That stimulates a response eventually. The signal has to be transduced. Okay, in other words, the signal has to be sent from here. This has to send a signal. This protein itself doesn't do anything. It's kind of like me holding up my wallet with my door key card in it and hitting that little thing. That's a receptor. Beep, the doorbell beeps. The door beeps. And then there's a transduction, which activates the response of the door opening. Okay? In the case of your cells, the transduction has to be done by molecules, what are called relay molecules, in some kind of pathway. Okay, so the door, this thing says I'm here, insulin is here, insulin is here, activate the cellular response. I don't think that's a hard concept so far. Let's talk about transduction briefly and then response in more detail. Okay, briefly about transduction, or briefly back about reception again. Your textbook talks about all kinds of different kinds of receptors. G protein linked receptors and ion channel receptors, and I don't think it's necessary to know that kind of detail. But understand that there's a signal is transduced. Proteins and ATP is used to send a message. Sometimes it uses something called a second messenger. This one's called CAMP. Okay? To take the signal, it's another molecule that goes somewhere else. Now this protein kinase A, you may remember that from the bacterial communication TED Talk. Okay? Protein kinase A. They talk about that specifically, I think it was in the TED Talk, now I'm starting to forget, I might have screwed that up, but protein kinase, oh no, I'm sorry, that was in our movie on cancer, that they're really looking at this protein to help prevent, if they can stop the working of that protein to help prevent cancer, but that's actually another story, sorry about that, I got confused a little. Anyway, transduction, take the signal from the receptor and make a cell response. Now, one thing about that signal is that that signal can be magnified. Okay? So, example, one molecule of epinephrine, which is adrenaline, can build up, sort of, because this protein gets activated, but this activates 100 of these, which activates 100 of these, which activates, each of these activate 100, so that's 1,000 of these, which each activate 10 of these, which each activate, and so on. So, excuse me, you can get, by the time you're done, adrenaline makes glycogen converted to glucose, 10 to the 8th molecules. That's the response because of the amplification here. Okay, let's talk about response. This will make more sense later. Okay, this will make more sense later, and we'll talk about this in chapter 17 and 18. But here's our receptor. Here's our transduction, goes into the nucleus. You can get a response from the nucleus. So what this literally does is turn a gene on. Okay, so you can get a communication to have it make the response then would need to make a protein or sometimes an enzyme to do something. In the case of the last slide we looked at, that was a cytoplasmic response, okay, where something happened in the cytoplasm of the cell. In